Well,
Oh, I could have said it. Yeah.
got it. Got it.
All right.
Well,
Okay.
Yeah. We're
welcome
good.
to a very intimate session of Examine Lives due to the unescapable chaos of the modern internet and registration systems. But we have a select group of those who went the extra mile and registered again on the website, which they should have had to do. And it's our 36th session. We did miss 1 month, so Examine Lives is 3 years and 1 month. And today's topic is evolutionary aesthetics. And I just give a couple questions at the outset, which we can depart from. What is the role of evolutionary theory in explaining aesthetics in nature and in human culture? And how might we describe our own aesthetic experiences? And as I was reviewing the recommended materials for today, I kept coming back to the phrase beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which I think sums it up as nicely as possible. So we can keep that in mind of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah. Although there are universal characteristics of beauty that act as honest signals of quality, such as symmetry or averageness, it's not a guarantee in nature or in human culture. And so beauty is in the eye of the beholder because displays of beauty are beautiful only when there's someone to bear witness. And sometimes that experience, that witnessing, prefers aspects that aren't necessarily related to processes of natural selection or consequences. And so there's an interplay, a coevolution that Richard Prum points out between the mind of who is doing this selection, this evaluation, and then the signal that is represented in the thing that is being found beautiful or aesthetic. But this is aesthetic relationship of that process to natural selection on physical functions from reproductive outcomes. And so that's a second order effect at times. And it can even be so far as irrelevant because natural selection becomes so weak because all of the male birds and all of the female birds, for instance, are in a certain co-evolved process of beauty that it will sustain itself despite that. Yes, if there were a departure, but the strength of that process is so profoundly linked to the experience of the agents in the population or the art museum viewer. And so I think that what's exciting about the whole thought around this for me is taking seriously the experience, trying to understand what is this aesthetic experience, and that makes us whether it's our own or even just appreciating that occurs in nature, how the minds, the cognition, the is really affecting what occurs, and that there's an open-endedness that isn't there when you're just thinking about natural selection or consequences. So that's what I'll leave it there and open it up.
I've been thinking about doing the reading. I started thinking about a few years ago. I was spending a lot of time in caves in France and northern Spain, looking as much as I could at cave art, which is going back 30 or 40,000 years or less, but tens of thousands of years. And one of the questions that's been asked since they were discovered in the late 19th century is, what is the purpose of art? Because people have been making it since the so-called creative revolution, which starts around then with modern humans. Although there are increasingly older examples popping up here and there. And it seems to me that the impulse to recreate, or to create something that is made that others will regard, is fundamental to modern human development. And I don't think that it's, personally, and from my discussions with a prehistorian named Jean-Claude, who was a cave expert, that it's designed to be aesthetically appreciated. I think it has a performative or spiritual or some kind of transcendental meaning. And that it's both in the act of doing it, because a lot of them are painted over. So they're not really meant to be, to have an audience come in and view them.
Mm-hmm.
Although we are now an audience that goes in and views them. So
I think you're identifying, like, if the true variety and aesthetic is probably too narrow. I think we could just generalize it. We maybe don't have a word for it, but that coevolution process between the mind experiencing and then the thing that has the signal. And depending on what that process is more about, like something that is this kind of display in a ritual, in a moment for a group of people, just then not like to communicate and be seen by others, or even in the future. And that's very different, but I think it fits that basic process, that coevolutionary process.
Yeah, there's one theory that painting an animal on the wall of a cave was a way of evoking the animal out of the stone.
Right.
And it has a really direct connection with the intimate interaction between the real animals and humans during that period. And gradually it became a kind of separate activity that was meant to be regarded. I'm sure Barth has a lot to say about that, but I haven't read him.
Bob, based on what you're saying, I just looked this morning at the video on Richard Prum. I don't know if anybody has listened to it. He's an amazing guy. I mean, he's like brilliant at his work as an ornithologist, but he really explained a lot of things to me. And he goes through a lot of, some of you already know about Darwin and Wallace and that whole business about coevolution. But here's what just came to mind. As a psychotherapist and looking at psychoanalytic theory, I never thought, I was amazed how this has come up, this creative part. But there's a concept that is kind of old, but called psychic equivalence. It's sort of equivalent to if I think it, it is it. If I believe I'm Napoleon, I am Napoleon. That would be one. So that's the notion in psychopathology is, but when we're talking about the cave paintings, and it's like that ancient psychic equivalence, like it's there to bring out the vitality or the spirit in the creature. It just struck me as like I'm kind of in awe now about what we're talking about. And I'm just dealing with psychopathology or trying to help people, and it's like it is transcendental in a way. Yeah.
Well, there's something, the coevolution is profound because it implies it's a two process. There's two people involved or two things involved. And so they're responding to each other. And so like this process of psychotherapy, you're the other side of that coin, and you're trying to invoke change in what you're receiving. But you're saying like Napoleon, if you believe you're Napoleon, well, it goes a little deeper. It's like, if I believe that you believe you're Napoleon,
then you're Napoleon.
It's like confidence. It's like if you're confident and then other people see you're confident, then you are confident.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like
But there's another piece to it. Now, I'm thinking in my world that I'm involved in, but Freudian psychoanalytic thinking or drive theory was a one-person psychology. It's only recently, maybe in the past 30 or 40 years, or maybe in the last, that it's become popular. It's called co-creation in the psychoanalytic community. It's like a brand new thing to them. But nobody ever talks about co-evolution.
Mhm.
And it's much older.
It's something
And
about
so,
you are also have to be changing, or maybe it's you have to be convinced, or deeply empathetic, of course, to um, you know, what you're receiving in order for the thing you're receiving to change.
yeah, but
Yeah.
Freud must have not read Darwin, which is hard to picture, but he just thought our minds develop in a mechanical way, and you have Oedipal complex or whatever, and the therapist or whoever doesn't need to be empathic. They just need to get the right information that fits the theory. So, anyways, I just went there just for a few minutes, it's kind of exciting in a way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
yeah.
boy, was he wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
Cesar or Kenneth, you guys have any ideas?
Well, if
I did,
I was
yes,
just going to toss
please.
in that the low attendance rate here is sort of stymied my
Hmm.
plan for the day. This is not an area I have a lot of knowledge in. I was planning to remain silent and be thought a fool rather than to speak up and remove all doubt. So,
Well, you're welcome. You're
I do
welcome.
have
Whatever.
a question or two I'd like to ask later, but
But
Sure.
Kenneth, you have a right to remain silent.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, you didn't remove doubt because we doubt that you're that incompetent. Well, I'm. What is the getting back to evolution? We have a sense of beauty and a sense of aesthetic appreciation that is not necessarily connected with choosing somebody to have sex with. I think, although that one article suggested it was the only reason it existed.
Well,
But you started me thinking about a sunset. Does the sunset occur because there's somebody to appreciate it? I mean, if there's nobody in the room for the sunset, does it exist? It's like the tree falling.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is like it. Yeah.
Well, there are certain speculative ideas about consciousness that suggest that the sunset may be aware of the fact that it's being enjoyed and appreciated, and there's some kind of psychic connection between the two, not just one way. But the sunset is kind of an accident of rotation and planetary organization and atmospheric effects and so on.
Well, it does require, it does for the idea of a sunset, for the appreciation of what that phenomenon is, requires someone there to appreciate it. And then more deeply still, it's just light. If we could just imagine that we didn't find the sunset anything at all. We could imagine there's many things that happen in nature which are unremarkable to us, even though on paper they're kind of arbitrarily could be something we're interested in. And what would that mean for the sunset? Would it stop being the way it is? I think it would be the way it is on its own, but with us, there's another layer, I guess. But it's about what it means to us. And so it's just in the context of our whole sense of aesthetics and beauty and meaning. So I think you're right. But it is, I can't get escape from the, if a tree falls in a forest, piece. Sort of seems like a necessary assumption.
Yeah, well, there wouldn't be any ideas about aesthetics at all if we weren't here.
Well, that's true.
We presume, although who knows? I mean, maybe the peacock spends a lot of time admiring its reflection in the water.
I think it does. I just don't think it thinks about itself doing that.
Yeah, I think Richard Prum, he didn't use this metaphor, but it's good you brought up the peacock because he uses peacocks in his. He's an ornithologist, but somebody asked a question about about cognition in birds or different birds, and do they? This he says most birds probably don't, and some do, but they're not aware of it. That was his notion of so. If the peacock stares at himself, he doesn't know he's staring. He just, but it could be happening, is the way I took
Yeah, he doesn't
what
have
he
to be
was suggesting.
self-conscious.
Yeah, yeah, but there's some cognition in all of this, these mating rituals, and
Oh yeah,
as well.
they're experiencing. Yeah, it's the same. There's no reason to think that they don't have rich experience, and it's a flow of psychological and
Right.
experiential. I mean, of course they do. It'd be really hard to argue they don't, I think.
Mhm.
But that they're conscious of it is not necessary for them to, that flow is enough for them to make choices, and they're agents. I think the word agent is a good one to just generalize like any system. Are its component parts, do they take in information? Do they have any kinds of choices that they can do in response to it? Are they separate from the thing? And I think like when you think of the particles of the atmosphere scattering the sun's light, it's that's the noosphere, if we want to say that that's part of the agent's definition. I would find that. I still can't wrap my head around that one.
Well,
Well,
on agents, yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say the birds don't talk about it the way we do. So
No. But talking about agency, and Prum talks about, he's in birdland all his life. So he talks about that all creatures, but in particular the birds, they do, I don't know, I don't know if these are his words, but these are my words. They do desire choice, having choice. And there's a whole thing that he talked about is talking about well, Umwelt, which he defined as a particular sensory experience of one's surroundings. So once that got clear to me, so of course we don't know what a bat is experienced or what a whale with their sounds, how they make sense of the world. But what I got from him was that, like you said, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's almost, whether it's beauty, it's the Umwelt, it's our own particular experience that's subjective. And my own view is, this is what I've been putting together, is that everybody here has their own Umwelt that they don't even know what it is, but whatever gets co-created with others in a group or in a conversation, we kind of agree on something, a facsimile of our particular Umwelt or subjectivity. And therefore, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I'll give one example I thought of, since we do have time. I was talking to a client of mine, a young lady, and she was talking about a relationship she's in. And she says, this is my little summary. She goes, I like it, mostly everything about this guy, but he doesn't have the right smell. And it was like, well, it's complicated. She's a complicated person, but this is what's coming up. It's like we even got our own pheromone or this sensory thing. And like, what the hell does that mean for, let's say, this young woman? I don't know how I can help her with, that's not the main issue. But yeah, we do like certain people's smells better than others. And like dogs like certain disgusting smells that we don't like. So, but there's something about this aesthetics and our own particular Umwelt that, and then how do we put that into, like, in the pro-social thing, and all of you who are more involved in it than I am, like, how does that apply to pro-sociality and, what's her name's, how do we work together for a better world, and what design do we use if each of us has our own Umwelt? And I don't know enough about the design principles to say, is the Umwelt of each individual considered in the design principles?
Well, there's something like about concepts, as to have a concept is to categorize. In other words, is to notice is to ignore the differences between things. And if you actually wanted to truly categorize the whole world and not ignore the differences at all, and like do it, every single thing would be different. One instance of a chair is nothing like
That's right. That's right.
an instance of another chair. And so there's a profound like wall between how far we can reach into the Umwelt of each other, of everything, even of ourselves, within ourselves. So I think we just accept as people in all of our interactions that we're just operating at a common reference layer, and what we really think or really are experiencing in any moment is hidden to a certain extent fundamentally, even to ourselves. And so we want to take things like the core design principles, or how we voice our opinion on those, as we want to take them seriously, but not literally, accepting that my interpretation of what anyone is saying is. But
well, I'd like to. I don't want to
Okay.
take. I don't,
Yeah,
but I just want to go into it later. I'm just want to, because this strikes me as interesting. Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to toss in that this concept of an Umwelt, my general sense is that, of course, your brain goes through life looking out at the world, and it makes dualistic judgments about everything. This is good for me, this is bad for me. Those things, they don't matter, in various degrees. And so your Umwelt is to some extent is entirely formulated, I think, by that. And so the example I use, of course, is, two people standing on a porch looking out at a blue bay. One of them sees a lovely blue, warm, inviting depth. The other one sees a black, forbidding depth. And, you know which one can swim and which can't. But specifically, once you have that, the brain also has an interesting, as I guess there's some psychologists present, has an ability called sublimation, in which you can take a need or a feeling and apply it to something in a related fashion, which is thankfully the reason we're able to have professional sports, and we don't have to be out there shooting at each other in order to work out our tribal grouping things, which are built in, which are biologically based. And so I'm wondering, when you look at a sunset and you say, wow, what a lovely sunset, what is that a sublimation of? Obviously, that sunset is not doing anything for you in particular. It's not giving you any food. It's not helping you get reproduced. I'm wondering how some of these sublimations occur.
I don't
Well,
know.
Ken.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to say, if I remember early Freud, what's sublimation? And it's kind of in a joke, but how does the anal drive or the anal state get sublimated? So for us humans, we walk down the street, we go past the bakery and say, wow, that's a beautiful croissant. The sublimation is, instead of saying, that is a wonderful piece of shit on the floor, I'd like to see how it tastes. So if you take that, but there is something to my quip about it, that sublimation is it depends on whose theory, but I'm going back to the Carl Abraham and Sigmund Freud. So I don't know other definitions of sublimation, but it's more like taking a particular drive. It's like, babies like their own poop. My dog eats sheep poop if I let her, rather than I'm not gonna, and I'll say, but I wouldn't mind having a lamb chop or something.
Well, I think it was I'll say what's clear to me is there's the example of the sunset is not of the same story of what Richard Prum is calling aesthetic evolution, because
No,
it's not co-evolving. The
right.
one side is the evaluator side, but the signal is not being selected upon. The sunset is not being selected upon. And even if there were a form of natural selection at like the geological level that's interacting with biology, and we wanted to like try to track down the way in which the atmosphere may have changed over epochs, of course, that is an important relationship, but there's no direct relationship with how we experience the sunset and the form of the sunset. It's in that way it's sublimated through climate and massive epochs of time, but it's very different because the subjective experience of any one person of the sunset, it's arbitrary with respect to that's not involved in what's happening to the sunset's effects. Whereas in the examples we're talking about, the signal is evolving directly in relationship with the evaluation. There has to be,
Sage,
yeah.
are you suggesting that and I'm being playful, that the sunset has no consciousness and can't be acted upon and act upon us?
Well, again, consciousness is a more narrow. We could just say agent, which means something that can make a choice, something that is interpreting information in the world.
Well, what about indigenous folks? Like the example of the cave paintings. I mean, I'm just,
well, there it is, because they're still making it. So the cave painting is shaped in response to the minds who are perceiving it.
Okay.
But if like instead of a cave painting, they just went and observed, which people do, of course, nature, and just go observe the way that the sand is shaped or the way the ocean looks, and what does that all mean? That's a different process. It's very related, of course, and I think that's like the bigger topic of the evolution of aesthetics or beauty, how we can see nature in not in just artifacts of life, be it birds or our paintings, but just symmetry and the world itself. The fact that we see it there is almost, it could be like a Steven Pinker, cheesecake for the mind. Like we have this process for interacting with each other, and then how could we not help but see the beauty of what's around us in similar lights? Because symmetry, just to give an example, is a feature that you find in nature, and then you can find as a good signal of health, for example. And so we kind of just get this little byproduct, but but we should keep those clear. Yeah.
Can I say something about sunsets?
Yes.
I mean, first of all, everybody uses sunsets as something that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, sunsets are only beautiful because the air is polluted. If the air were clear, the sunsets would be boring. We have contributed to the making of the sunsets through our bad air.
Yes, that's the indirect the process that I was giving to, and that is definitely true. It's just that the things that we're doing to contribute are not in relation. We're not thinking of the beauty of the sunset when we decide.
Well, we do lots of things that we're not thinking about.
That's a provocative. Yeah, you can.
Well, it seems.
Bob,
first of all, we think that sunsets are something that exists outside of us. I've been reading that book about awe, and sunsets are sometimes awesome. But there's a website called Vehement, which is the voluntary human extinction movement. And what he says is, if we all stop having children, the atmosphere will clear up, the earth will regain its health, and the last person alive will see a beautiful sunset. Well, he won't. She won't.
Can I jump in here? I'm very late, but I don't think that we're dependent on pollution to have beautiful sunsets. All you need is some clouds here and there, or some mist or something. we're not, you know, if we're talking about if we're
Yeah.
talking about things that are evolved, if we think that our aesthetics, and I missed everything in the first half hour, I'm really sorry. So if I'm repeating anything,
It was
forgive me.
fun, Diane. It was fun. Join in.
It should be that you know, our aesthetic sense does something beneficial for us, evolutionarily speaking.
Right.
And so to the extent that we find things aesthetically pleasing, those things are probably in some way beneficial to us. Sage was trying to say that, I think.
I think they can be, but they also, the process once established, that I think is an important like first stage, and I'm sure is, but it doesn't remain a necessary condition for continued aesthetic evolution, as it were.
Evolution or development in the individual?
Well, the evolution is because it's the trait of in the population is changing in response and to the individual, many individuals. So it's selection on the physical functions of the signal. Let's think of just birds, for example, and as a product of selection by individual minds of the many, and those minds, then there's an interplay between the two over time. So the minds then, think of the bird, the female bird that selects the male with the brightest plumage and then their female offspring are more likely to also see that plumage as beautiful, and its males are also likely to be well suited to reenact that. And so if there is a positive benefit, that it is an honest signal of health or reproductive or anything else, that might get it started and it might help it persist. But it also, if all the males look the same and all the females have like this, there's little variation to select upon, then you just can have runaway sexual selection and aesthetic evolution that has truly nothing to do. And Richard Prum shows examples that actually are really costly and risk like the potential extinction of some of these species, but there's no relative to select against, because if a bird, even if they shirked the trend, they wouldn't reproduce. So you can get stuck in these.
Yeah, well, that's what we talked about in the Fisherian runaways discussion.
Yeah,
we talked about that, and also honest, costly signals. So it all kind of, we've built our way up, but elimination.
Why does this strike me as a particularly capitalist interpretation, looking for the profit in what we're doing here? It seems to me that aesthetic appreciation makes you happy, and happy people are probably more likely to reproduce. So even without all this signaling and interactivity and the sort of exchange of value that seems to be going on.
No, I agree. I think that's the beauty of the appreciation of the importance of the experience, is that is all it is. When you get to like our lives and these kinds of experiences, the experience itself is what is important. Anything else, any other second order effects, is like, yeah, they might fit in or matter in some vague level, but they might just be completely irrelevant. And in fact, the joy of like creating art or literature or any kind of creative act is often in breaking out of that and forming a new lineage, which just like takes what is there and does something different just for the sake of doing it. And then others can join in on trying to. So, I mean, I think we can appreciate like how far you can go as you remove yourself from, is this male stronger for that male and into incredibly profound behaviors that are so far away from that.
But folks, Prum, he talks about the aesthetic appreciation as a co-evolutionary, and he was talking about art in our world. This is worth billions. This is the greatest art, and basically he was suggesting that art is what we've been talking about. Dual inheritance theory is the culture based. Like the culture says, this is worth $4 million. And therefore, it's not the individual anymore, but it's the culture, it's the market, it's the tribe that's going to say this. Like, to me, you could tell me it's worth 10 million. If I don't like it, I don't like it. But if I had that money, I would invest in it, and that I would be contributing to the overvaluation of the piece of work, not because it's my aesthetic, but it's the culturally informed aesthetic that we're asked to buy into.
Yeah. So like, whereas the dynamic is an individual mind and experience something, the selection is there, but the overall evolution is at the whole population. And there it's that creates the cultural version, what gets selected out of the population. So convention is a huge part about these experiences. And so it's always the individual in their context. And I don't know if anybody got a chance to look at the art experience paper, but it makes the interesting point around this of the institutional context of going to an art museum, for example, and looking at a piece of art, and it even looking at like Marcel Duchamp's, fountain, urinal. In any other context, you wouldn't try to interpret it. But here you're asked, like, why is it here? What does this mean? So it asks interpretation, and the context makes it more relevant for you to do that. If you just wandered around asking that about every urinal, it would be exhausting, and it would be kind of a waste of time, because the answer is because this is the bathroom. But so there's something about that sense, but the whole idea of an art museum, and that this is art, and that we do this, and that there's a famous name, and that it's worth this much money, those are all just part of the conventions, and especially just like Western culture, and that you have to do that to get into that state of mind is capitalist and contrived, but it's also just like an interesting example. And then we do that all the time on our own, and those are probably the ways that we enjoy more. They're harder to pin down because they're less conventional, the way that you sort of really get into that open-minded state, which and do creative acts, becomes highly personal again. So there's something interesting about how there's an institutional scenarios, rituals, tradition, spirituality, like very public and shared, and then also like really personal. Hard to get into that space without a trusted people around you.
You're reminding me now of the famous figurine found at Çatalhöyük in Turkey of a very large, possibly or probably female, who may or may not. She's sitting in in like a chair with two leopards one on each side, and it's possible that she's giving birth at the same time. You can't quite tell.
Yeah.
And this figurine became the focus of a lot of feminist stuff about matriarchy in the old days, and Maria Gambudis and all a whole structure of social meaning put around this figurine, which was found in the midden. It was found in the garbage. And we don't know what the meaning of this thing was. We don't know what the meaning of the Venus of Willenborg really is. But we've created this whole social message around it. And I think that a lot of what we're talking about is how we're investing meaning into aesthetic experiences that give us something, solace or hope.
And I always try, whenever for my definition of meaning, I always think of it as it's like where information meets context. It's like the same thing in different contexts has different meanings. And so there's also that's part of why the open-endedness comes from the fact that our context, it could be where we are, a museum or a garbage alleyway, or just how we felt that day or that minute we were with, that these are all different opportunities for different meanings to occur. And So then therefore it's like a very lived act. Like you have to do so, you have to behave, you have to be there, experience in like real time in order for there to be any change of meaning. Because if you're not experiencing it, then you just have some, yeah, it's just stored as a memory or as an artifact of your influence on others, you know.
Yeah, that figurine is now in a museum. So
That's right, because otherwise how would we look at it?
yeah, exactly.
Couldn't
It's
understand it.
Context is important.
It's like when the famous, you know, violinists or opera singers will just sing on the street in New York and people pass them by, and then somebody, you know, donates $5, really likes it, and they're like, here's front row tickets, and then they go see him that night, and that's like, you know, ovation.
But I was thinking, Bob, what you said about sunsets and the discussion, and I thought about our happy sunsets or the aesthetics make people happy. But what about the competition about, let's say, I won't get into a Jackie Mason routine on it, but whose sunset is more aesthetic and more satisfying? And I'll arm wrestle you for it, or we'll have two universities discussing it, or whatever. So there's the whole thing about, you know, this co-creation, how complex it is in the context of people behavior. And since I'm not an evolutionary expert, I can't put that into the language of, you know, evolutionary biology, of how these complex variables operate.
Kenneth was raising the you know, the fact that we evolved as a social species. So, you know, interaction with each other and putting meaning into all of our kinds of complicated signaling is built in. It's not something that we invented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that of course accounts for, you know, significant aesthetic differences between these groups. There's tremendous differences in taste. Could I just, if you want to ignore it, fine. I just wanted to toss out another question simply. I've been trying to understand exactly what music is. I mean, what is it? Homo sapiens seems to be the only species for which a particular sequence of sounds produces an enormous emotional attachment.
Ken, sorry, but if you listen to that guy's talk, the bird guy, I forget his name.
Richard
He
Prum.
talks, but yeah, if you listen to him, he says whatever birds he was talking about, and they were dealing with music and aesthetics, these birds somehow know about fifths. You know, I don't remember.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So there are a lot of, he knows about birds. He doesn't talk about other creatures, but they got their music. I don't know how they got it, but it obviously was there before only us humans, you know, just like probably whales and, you know, the other creatures.
Right, but my understanding is that's all for communication purposes. They're not doing that to create an emotional experience in the other bird as humans do.
I think that's exactly what
we don't know that.
No, it's part of, according to the guy, it's part of courting. It's part of influencing other than data.
Yeah,
they are meaning making creatures is what I'm getting from him, you know.
Yeah, Richard Prum would say, of course it's about the experience of the other creature, because otherwise the signal has no meaning. So it only has meaning because there's an experience there, and yeah, how well do we know the subjective experience, the emotional, if we want to give it that word? Well, we don't have to get that. I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't know. Maybe some people have some claims there, but it's. I was just thinking about music. I think there's a lot to say about what's different about it, but it's amazing what is similar. And there are profound symmetries in the pitch and intervals that relate them, and even the kinds of, the way you describe those. So, and if we go back to what, like the idea, like just as a convenient model, that this would be a staged process where in the beginning you would have signals, like more like Darwin's sexual selection. It's a strong signal of reproductive from creatures that had none of this, right? So that makes sense, and certainly is a good model. But then once you have that, early things like symmetry might have been a feature. And so there might be a lot of universal attendance to symmetry, as health, whatever. That's a whole idea. But if we take that as true, then symmetry can just become the thing itself, and we have this capacity to appreciate it, and suddenly our music, our sounds, the colors of a bird, or what we see in beauty of a sunset, we can just apply this everywhere. And with that in mind, you can create new things that have just nothing to do with any kind of adaptive outcome.
But I'm just trying to understand what is why is it that Beethoven's Ninth moves me? It's not affecting my reproduction. It's not affecting my ability to survive. How did it evolve? How did that evolve into the species?
Well, can I jump in?
Please.
Yeah, I think what evolved is not our response to anything in particular, but the fact that there is a range of aesthetic responses that are possible. And I don't think we're in any position to say that animals don't have it. Human music, for example, seems to be very much enjoyed by quite a lot of mammals, from cows to dogs, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if they're real, experimental
I seen
kind
that
of, control group experiments. But I mean, you can look on YouTube or Twitter or something and see, a little girl playing an accordion, and the cows come to listen to her, or a dog that, bangs on some of the keys of piano and goes, "Ooh, fun, honey." They're clearly having some sort of pleasure out of the situation. And, our appreciation for art and for music and so forth, it seems to me it shows that we have a very wide range of aesthetic appreciation. It's not just visual, it's not just what we hear, it's not even rhythmic movements or something like that, dance, whatever, covers the whole range. And that's probably also true for other animals. And I think we grossly underestimate their ability to communicate either at the emotional level or at the informational level. I just saw that now some people are undertaking to decipher crocodile communication.
Yeah.
Would never think of, but they're very vocal, and they apparently have, messages for one another.
Now that's an old creature.
Yeah, and I don't think our aesthetic sense is very much tuned into whatever aesthetics crocodiles might possess, or many other kinds of creatures. But
I just wanted to give a nod to Kenneth, because that is such a profound question, and actually trying to explain it all is seemingly, I mean, I just fall over at this point, but it's so funny because you start to feel like you can see the pieces and some of the ways of understanding it, and we're tying a lot together here. It's really great. Just to answer that question, it's like Nagel's "What's it like to be a bat?" Why does Beethoven's Fifth move me? Well, Kenneth, only you know, and even then, you probably don't, because you only can access a certain theory of mind of your own. I mean, geez.
I just
want to say,
why Beethoven's Ninth moves you and his Seventh doesn't is another question.
That's the great unknown, right? I mean, there's some things are unknown.
Well, I'm going to make a joke, just that I've had sex, this is a joke, during Beethoven's Ninth. A joke. I haven't, that I know of. But I'm saying...
which part?
Ode to Joy at the end.
Yeah, of course.
That's because I learned that as a kid, No, but yeah, it's true about this level of individual experience, and how we then, as each subculture or tribe, codifies what we're supposed to make us happy. Like Bob said, happiness is fitness. Well, my Umwelt of happiness might be different than everybody else's there, or I don't even know what it is exactly, but I know I can feel happy or excited or a high sense of well-being. I don't like happiness, by the way. I like senses of well-being continually.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Wow.
I just wanted to say that I was once in a bar in Montana where where the owner of the bar would play the piano and her German Shepherd would sing.
Yep.
Absolutely. Almost in tune.
Almost.
Okay, can I ask one more question?
Sure, close this out, Kenneth.
And that's just, you know, I think the first thing that was ever recorded that we could call art was a handprint on the cave wall that was traced out in charcoal. And if you take that thousands of years forward to the early 19th century, when you have a detailed landscape, it's the same thing. It's just greater detail. There has been no great change. But then 100 years later, you have Jackson Pollock standing on a ladder, squeezing paint onto a blank canvas. Is there anything about evolutionary process that can describe what happened in 100 years?
Oh, I think I think that's what the field of cultural evolution is trying to do, but it's
Yeah.
nascent that we'll have to wait and see. But I mean, talking about the phylogeny, the over time lineage of culture, just like we do biology, is certainly one of the grand goals of cultural evolution. And it's only been around for in any real form since maybe the 70s, but in really most recently as a field, like the last 20-25 years. So we have to reach back. So I think those are great questions. That's the kind of stuff that if we find any leads there, please share. Because I
was just going to say that 100 years is not long enough for any kind of DNA change to occur, so it has to be entirely cultural.
Cultural, but interfacing with our development, which interfaces really strongly with our biology and our how we come into the world, and our sociological environment affects our biology as well. And so, but yes, not at the genetic level, but the possible expression of our genes is really what we're looking at.
I'd just like to make, one quip for Bob. Based on our cultural evolution, Bob, I want to say we're all cultured.
Unless you're raised by wolves.
That's right. And they're cultured.
Then you have wolf culture.
So you can pass that along with your group of quips of the evolutionary leaders that we're all cultured.
Okay, guys. I think we will put the vote on high-low for the next topic. And are we all there? Just so I know from this group, are you guys all on the high-low site?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll put it there. We can get more voices if
You're
there's
gonna leave it there, or do we have to do it right now? Because I'm about to get picked up for.
Yeah, no, we'll do it on high-low. We can have more folks. We're a small group today.
Can I suggest, Sage, that we do this thing again next time and get more people in?
Sure, we could do a part 2. And that would be interesting, us kind of having.
I mean, if we could get more people, I don't know if it's the topic that bothers people.
Well, we'll sort out the details on high-low. So thanks for another
August,
everybody.
August is taking people away.
That makes sense. Yes.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye.